The storm arrived without invitation, a feral beast clawing its way up the Oregon coast. It slammed into the shoreline with the force of a battering ram, churning the Pacific into a cauldron of slate-gray fury. Rain fell in horizontal sheets, blurring the line between sea and sky, and the wind howled like a banshee, a relentless, primal scream that seemed to tear at the very foundations of the world. Perched defiantly on the highest cliff, like a fortress daring the heavens to do their worst, stood the Eyrie. The Eyrie was less a house and more a monument to one man's ego. It belonged to Marcus Thorne, a real estate magnate whose ambition was as vast and unforgiving as the ocean that crashed below his panoramic windows. The house was a marvel of modern architecture, a symphony of glass, steel, and dark cedar designed to withstand the temper of the coast. On this night, it served another purpose. It was a gilded cage, trapping a handful of souls within its walls as the storm severed their connection to the outside world. The single road leading to the estate was flooded, phone lines were dead, and the internet was a forgotten luxury. Inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. Marcus Thorne, a man with a face carved from granite and eyes like chips of ice, was holding court in his cavernous study. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with the atmospheric pressure drop. Gathered before him was a small, volatile audience. There was his wife, Isabella, 30 years his junior, a woman of breathtaking beauty whose vibrant spirit seemed to have been slowly extinguished during her 5 years of marriage. She stood by the fireplace, her silhouette framed by the flames, her arms crossed tightly, as if to ward off a chill that came from within. Across the room, nursing a glass of amber liquid, was Julian Thorne, Marcus's only son from his first marriage. Julian had his father's height but none of his steel. His was a face of perpetual disappointment, his eyes holding a familiar mix of resentment and defeated longing. He and his father had been locked in a cold war for years, a battle of wills that Julian was destined to lose. Slouched in a leather armchair, trying to project an air of calm he clearly didn't feel, was Elias Vance, Marcus's business partner. Elias was sharp, ambitious, and utterly ruthless, a younger, hungrier version of Marcus himself. But recently, the partnership had soured, and rumors of a bitter corporate divorce were circulating through their world like a contagion. Finally, moving silently in the background, was Ava Monroe, Marcus's personal assistant. Efficient, observant, and almost invisible, Ava was the keeper of all of Marcus's secrets. She knew where the bodies were buried because she had, metaphorically speaking, handed him the shovel. Her loyalty was absolute, her expression unreadable. The argument, like most arguments with Marcus, was a monologue of his own making. He was dismantling them one by one with a cold, surgical precision. He spoke of Isabella's spending habits, which had become reckless. He derided Julian's latest failed business venture, which he had refused to finance. He laid out, with chilling clarity, how he intended to dissolve his partnership with Elias, leaving him with little more than a mountain of debt. "This is not a negotiation," Marcus concluded, his voice as low and dangerous as the rumble of the distant surf. "These are the terms of your reality. My reality. You will all learn to live with it." The storm outside crescendoed, and a deafening crack of thunder shook the house, causing the lights to flicker and die, plunging the room into darkness. A collective gasp filled the silence, broken only by the roar of the wind. Ava, ever prepared, was the first to move, her calm voice cutting through the tension. "The generator should kick in momentarily. I'll get the emergency lanterns." When the backup lights hummed to life a minute later, casting the room in an eerie, sterile glow, Marcus Thorne was alone. The others had dispersed, melting away into the shadows of the vast, cold house, leaving the faint scent of fear and anger in their wake. The night wore on, each inhabitant of the Eyrie isolated by the storm and their own private turmoil. Sleep was a commodity none of them could afford. The house groaned and shuddered under the assault of the wind, the windows rattling in their frames. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep. Morning came not with a sunrise, but with a slow, reluctant graying of the sky. The storm had broken, leaving behind a world washed clean and utterly devastated. The wind had subsided to a mournful sigh, but the ocean still heaved with exhaustion. It was Mrs. Gable, the stout, no-nonsense housekeeper who lived in a small cottage on the grounds and had ridden out the storm with a rosary and a bottle of sherry, who found him. The door to the study was ajar. She had entered, expecting to find the room in its usual state of impeccable order, ready to collect Mr. Thorne's breakfast tray. Instead, she was met with chaos. A heavy crystal decanter lay shattered on the floor, its amber contents staining the priceless Persian rug. A chair was overturned. Papers were scattered. And behind the massive oak desk, slumped in his leather chair, was Marcus Thorne. His head was canted at an unnatural angle. His usually immaculate suit was disheveled and stained a dark, horrifying crimson. A letter opener with a heavy silver handling antique he normally used for opening mail was embedded deep in his chest. His cold, dead eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, a final, silent testament to the fury that had visited him in the night. Mrs. Gable's scream was a raw, ragged sound that was swallowed by the house's oppressive silence. Detective Liam O'Connell arrived 4 hours later, after the county road crews had managed to clear a path through the fallen trees and debris. O'Connell was a transplant from the Portland Police Bureau, a man who had sought the quiet solitude of the coast after a high-profile case had gone sideways, leaving him scarred and disillusioned. He was tall and lean, with a weary face and eyes that had seen too much. He moved with a quiet deliberation that often made people underestimate him, which was exactly how he liked it. He stepped into the study and the world seemed to slow down. His partner, a young, eager local deputy named Ben Carter, started rattling off the preliminary details. O'Connell barely heard him. He was absorbing the scene, letting the room speak to him. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was personal. The sheer violence of a combination of blunt force trauma to the head and the final, brutal stabbing spoke of a rage that was deep and intimate. He knelt beside the body, his gaze methodical. He noted the defensive wounds on Marcus's hands, the broken fingernails. The man had fought back. He had fought his killer. O'Connell's eyes scanned the floor around the desk, a slow, patient sweep, and then he saw it. Half hidden beneath the heavy velvet curtain that pooled on the floor, something glinted in the weak morning light. It was small and gold. Carefully, using a pen to nudge the curtain aside, he revealed it. A man's ring. A heavy, gold signet ring. It wasn't Marcus's. O'Connell had already noted the victim's bare fingers, save for the plain platinum wedding band. This ring had been lost in the struggle. Dropped. Forgotten. He used his tweezers to pick it up, dropping it into an evidence bag. He held it up to the light. It was old, the gold worn smooth in places. Engraved on its face was a crest, a design he didn't recognize. A stylized raven with its wings unfurled, clutching a key in its talons. "Get everyone accounted for," O'Connell said to Carter, his voice a low rumble. "The wife, the son, the partner, the assistant. No one leaves. No one speaks to anyone. This house is now my house." His interviews began in the library, a room lined with books that had likely never been read. One by one, he brought them in, the 4 people who had been caged with a dead man during the storm. Each of them was a study in controlled grief and barely concealed fear. Isabella Thorne, the widow, was first. She was pale but composed, her beauty somehow more fragile in the harsh light of day. She recounted the argument from the night before, her voice steady. She claimed she had gone to her suite of rooms immediately after, taken a sedative her doctor had prescribed for her anxiety, and slept until Mrs. Gable's scream had woken her. "Marcus was a difficult man," she said, her eyes welling with tears that O'Connell suspected were more for her own future than for her dead husband. "But I never wished him harm." Julian Thorne was next. He was defensive, his anger a thin veneer over a trembling nervousness. He admitted to the argument, admitted to hating his father. He said he'd spent the night in the East Wing, drinking himself into a stupor while listening to the storm. "Did I want him dead? Sometimes. Did I kill him? No. I didn't have the guts." He confessed with a bitter, self-loathing honesty that O'Connell found almost believable. Elias Vance was a different animal entirely. He was smooth, polished, and oozing corporate sincerity. He expressed profound shock and sadness over the death of his friend and mentor. He downplayed the argument, dismissing it as a typical passionate business disagreement between two strong-willed men. His alibi was that he had been in his guest room, on his laptop, trying to salvage the deal his partner had just torpedoed. Marcus's death is a tragedy for the company, he said, his gaze unwavering. For all of us. O'Connell noted the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his left hand as he gestured. Finally, there was Ava Monroe. She was a ghost. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. Her answers were concise and direct. She confirmed the details of the argument. She stated she had retired to her room in the staff quarters after ensuring the generator was stable. Her alibi was that she had worked on transcribing Marcus's notes until the early hours of the morning before falling asleep. She offered no emotion, no opinion. She was a blank slate, and in O'Connell's experience, blank slates were often the ones hiding the most. He asked each of them the same final question. He placed the evidence bag containing the ring on the table between them. Have you ever seen this ring before? Isabella shook her head, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. No, never. Julian squinted at it. Doesn't look familiar. Not my father's style. Ava Monroe stared at it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I have not, she said, her voice flat. But when O'Connell showed it to Elias Vance, he saw something. A brief, micro-expression, a tightening of the jaw, a flicker of the eyes before his smooth mask of composure slid back into place. No, detective, Elias said, his voice a little too casual. Can't say that I have. It was a lie. O'Connell knew it with the same certainty that he knew the tide would turn. Elias Vance had recognized the ring. As the business partner left the room, O'Connell held the small bag up to the light again. The raven and the key. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a story, a secret, and it was now the key to everything. The storm outside had passed, but for the people trapped inside the Eyrie, the real storm was just beginning. The days following the murder at the Eyrie were draped in a shroud of unnatural quiet. The visceral memory of the storm lingered, a phantom presence in the bruised sky and the debris-littered coastline. For Detective Liam O'Connell, the oppressive silence within the mansion was more deafening than the gale-force winds had been. It was the silence of secrets, of lies simmering beneath a carefully maintained surface of grief and shock. He had 4 suspects, all with motive, all with opportunity, and all locked in a holding pattern of suspicion within the glass and cedar cage Marcus Thorne had built. His investigation, for now, had a singular, unwavering focus. The small, gold object in the evidence locker. The raven and the key. His first port of call was a local jeweler in the nearby town of Astoria. A man named Silas Blackwood who had been crafting and repairing jewelry for over 50 years. Silas had hands like gnarled oak roots and eyes magnified by a jeweler's loupe, through which he seemed to see the soul of any object placed before him. O'Connell laid the evidence bag on the worn velvet counter. Silas picked it up, his movements slow and reverent. He examined the ring for a long time, turning it over and over. It's old, Silas rasped, his voice like gravel. 22-karat gold, which is unusual. Too soft for daily wear, so this was for special occasions. The craftsmanship is European, I'd say. German, perhaps, from the early 20th century. But this crest, he squinted. This is not a family crest. Not one I've ever seen. Heraldry is precise. This is more. Symbolic. A raven for knowledge, for secrets. Well, for unlocking them. Could you trace it? O'Connell asked. Silas shook his head. No maker's mark. It's custom, almost certainly a one-of-a-kind piece, or one of a very small number. This wasn't bought in a shop. This was commissioned. It signifies membership to something. A club. A society. O'Connell's gut had been telling him the same thing. It was the kind of ostentatious, self-important symbol that a group of wealthy young men at an Ivy League university might invent for themselves. This line of inquiry sent him down a rabbit hole of digital archives and university records. He tasked Deputy Carter with a painstaking search, cross-referencing the victim and the suspects with attendance records for every major university in the country, looking for any mention of secret societies, fraternities, or clubs with raven or key motifs. It was a tedious, needle-in-a-haystack endeavor. While Carter chased digital ghosts, O'Connell focused on the tangible lives of his suspects, believing that the truth of the ring would be meaningless without the context of the people it connected. He started with the widow. A background check on Isabella Thorne, née Rossi, revealed a past that was a far cry from the polished socialite she presented. She came from a working-class family in Nevada, and her father was a man with a gambling addiction and ties to loan sharks. O'Connell discovered that just weeks before Marcus's murder, Isabella had made a series of desperate wire transfers to a holding company in Las Vegas, a company he quickly traced back to a notorious enforcer for the mob. Marcus had clearly been her golden goose, but had he finally tired of paying off her family's debts? Had he threatened to cut her off, forcing her to take desperate measures? He brought her in for a second interview, this time at the temporary command post he'd set up in the mansion's guest house. He didn't ask her about the murder. He asked her about Las Vegas. The color drained from her face. "My father. He gets into trouble," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus was generous. He helped at first. And then he stopped? O'Connell prodded gently. Tears welled in her eyes. The night he died, that's what the argument was about. He'd found out about the latest debt. He said it was the last time. He was going to cut me off, change his will. He said I would leave his house with nothing but the clothes on my back. Her motive was now crystal clear, shining and sharp. She stood to lose everything. Now, she stood to inherit a significant portion of a billion-dollar estate, provided the prenuptial agreement didn't wipe her out. O'Connell made a note to have the Thorne family lawyers subpoenaed. Next, he turned his attention to the son, Julian. His story was simpler, but no less potent. It was a classic tale of a son overshadowed and crushed by a domineering father. O'Connell dug into the failed business venture Marcus had mentioned. It had been a sustainable tech startup, a passion project for Julian. He had poured his life savings into it, and he'd been counting on his father's investment to secure the next round of funding. Marcus hadn't just refused, he had actively sabotaged it. He had called Julian's potential investors and disparaged the project, calling his own son a feckless dreamer with no head for business. The company had collapsed a week before the murder. When O'Connell confronted Julian with this, the young man's bitter composure finally broke. He didn't just say no, Julian spat, his voice thick with rage. He enjoyed destroying it. It was his last great lesson, that I was nothing without him. He wanted to see me fail. Well, now he's dead, and I'll get the money to rebuild it all. Is that what you want to hear? Yes, I'm glad he's dead. But my hands are clean. His anger was raw and believable, but O'Connell knew that rage was a powerful catalyst. The partner, Elias Vance, remained the most polished and impenetrable of the suspects. His alibi of working on his laptop seemed plausible, but digital forensics told a different story. A warrant for his devices revealed that his laptop had been inactive for a 3-hour window on the night of the murder, a window that neatly coincided with the coroner's estimated time of death. When confronted with this discrepancy, Elias didn't flinch. The Wi-Fi was spotty because of the storm, he said smoothly. I was working offline, drafting emails, reviewing documents. They wouldn't have registered on the network. It was a plausible lie, impossible to disprove. But it was the lie about the ring that stuck with O'Connell. Why deny recognizing it if he was innocent? The breakthrough came from Deputy Carter. After days of fruitless searching, he found it. A grainy, black-and-white photograph in the digital archives of a 1995 Dartmouth College yearbook. The photo was of a group of 10 young men in rowing gear, smug and confident. The caption read, "The Corvus Society. Founders Regatta." And there, on the pinky finger of a handsome, dark-haired young man in the front row, was the ring, the raven and the key. Carter ran facial recognition on the photo. The young man with the ring was a 21-year-old Elias Vance. Standing right behind him, his arm slung around Elias's shoulder, was a 22-year-old Marcus Thorne. The Corvus Society, O'Connell read from the file Carter had compiled, Latin for raven or crow, an unsanctioned, underground final club at Dartmouth. Highly secretive. Membership was supposedly for the elite of the elite. They were notorious for their wild parties and dangerous hazing rituals. They were disbanded by the university in 1996 after an incident. What kind of incident? O'Connell asked, leaning forward. A student drowned, Carter said, his voice low. A pledge. His name was Kevin Miller. It happened during a late-night initiation ritual on the Connecticut River. The official ruling was accidental death. Excessive drinking, fell off a boat. But there were rumors. Rumors that the Corvus members didn't call for help right away, that they tried to cover it up to protect themselves. Nothing was ever proven. The families of the members were powerful. Lawyers got involved. It all just went away. Suddenly, the pieces began to shift, rearranging themselves into a new, much darker picture. This wasn't just about a business deal. This was about a secret 25 years old that bound Marcus and Elias together. A secret that Marcus, a man who severed ties with cold finality, might have been threatening to expose. O'Connell's final interview was with the enigma, Ava Monroe. He had saved her for last, sensing that she was the key to understanding the victim himself. A deep dive into her background revealed nothing but a sterling record. Impeccable references, a history of working for powerful men, and a reputation for fierce loyalty and discretion. But her financials showed something interesting. A large payment $250,000 made from a private account belonging to Marcus Thorne into her own, just 2 days before he was killed. It wasn't payroll. It looked like a payment for a service. He met her in the library again. The room felt heavy with unspoken words. He didn't ask her about the money. Instead, he placed the Dartmouth yearbook photo on the table. Ava glanced at it, her expression unchanging. I'm aware of Mr. Thorne's affiliation with that group, she said. Were you also aware of the death of Kevin Miller? A flicker of something surprise? Recognition? Crossed her face before it was gone. I know the official story. I think you know more than that, O'Connell said, his voice quiet but firm. I think Marcus hired you for your discretion because he was a man with secrets. And I think recently he hired you to do something specific. Something worth $250,000. Ava was silent for a full minute. She stared at the photo of the young, smiling men, a ghost of a life lived long ago. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and precise. Mr. Thorne was a man who believed in cutting losses, she began. That applied to businesses and it applied to people. He had decided to cut ties with Mr. Vance. It wasn't just about the business. It was about the past. He felt a late-in-life guilt, I suppose. Or perhaps he just saw Mr. Vance as a liability he no longer wished to carry. She took a deep breath. Kevin Miller's sister has been petitioning to have the case of her brother's death reopened for years. She believes there was a cover-up. She recently came into possession of new evidencia letter from another pledge who has since died, detailing what really happened that night. She contacted Mr. Thorne, threatening to go public. Mr. Thorne saw an opportunity. He decided to get ahead of the story, to confess his part in the cover-up in exchange for immunity, and in doing so to destroy Mr. Vance completely. The money he paid me was for a private investigator. I was hired to find corroborating evidence against Mr. Vance, to build a case for the district attorney. The entire motive snapped into focus. Elias wasn't just losing a business. He was about to lose his entire life. He was about to be charged in connection with a decades-old death. The argument in the study wasn't just about money. It was about total annihilation. On the night of the murder, Ava continued, her voice dropping, after the argument, Mr. Vance came to find me. He knew I handled Mr. Thorne's private affairs. He cornered me in the hallway. He was menacing. He asked me what Marcus was planning. He tried to bribe me, then he threatened me. I told him nothing. "Why are you telling me this now?" O'Connell asked. "Because Mr. Thorne, for all his faults, did not deserve to be murdered. And because the man who killed him is a predator who has gotten away with it for far too long." O'Connell had the motive. He had the lie about the alibi. He had the lie about the ring. But he still lacked the final, irrefutable piece of physical evidence that tied Elias Vance to the crime scene. The ring proved he had a connection to the victim's past, but it didn't prove he was in the room that night. He went back to the evidence logs from the crime scene. He read through every detail, every fiber found, every latent print lifted. And then he saw it. A single line item, logged under miscellaneous trace evidence, that he had previously overlooked. Small fragment of dark blue, high-tensile polymer fiber, found embedded in the victim's broken fingernail. At the time, it had meant nothing. A random fiber from a piece of clothing or upholstery. But now, with Ava's story about Elias menacing her in the hallway, an image flashed in his mind. The image of Elias in the library during his first interview. The almost imperceptible tremor in his hand. And what he'd been wearing. It wasn't a suit. It was a dark, expensive-looking waterproof jacket. The kind one might wear in a storm. "Carter," O'Connell said into his phone, his voice electric with sudden certainty. "Get a warrant to search Elias Vance's luggage and his car. I'm looking for a jacket. A dark blue, high-performance rain jacket. And when you find it, I want you to look very, very closely at the right cuff." He knew what they would find. A tiny tear, a single snagged thread, where a desperate, dying man had reached out and grabbed onto his killer, taking one last, silent piece of evidence with him to the grave. The Raven had kept its secret for 25 years. But the key had finally found its lock. The air in the area had grown thin and sharp, each breath a reminder of the violence that had fractured its pristine solitude. For Detective O'Connell, the case had finally coalesced. The scattered pieces, the lies, the secrets, the decades-old death had formed a single, damning narrative pointing directly at Elias Vance. But a narrative was not enough. O'Connell needed to slam the door shut, to present a case so airtight that even a man as slippery and well-resourced as Elias would find no escape. The key was the jacket. While Deputy Carter secured the warrant, O'Connell decided it was time to rattle the cage. He orchestrated a series of quiet, deliberate movements. He had the dive team from the county sheriff's office begin a methodical search of the churning waters at the base of the cliff below the study, a search for a potential murder weapon. Though he suspected the silver letter opener was the only one, the theatricality of it was the point. He wanted Elias to see the net closing, to feel the pressure building from all sides. He then requested a second, formal look at Marcus Thorne's financials, specifically any and all transfers made to Elias Vance over the past 2 years. He suspected the business dissolution was not just a power play but was triggered by something concrete. The answer came back from the forensic accountants within hours. Marcus had discovered Elias was embezzling. Not through complex corporate schemes, but through a simple, brazen system of inflated invoices and kickbacks from contractors on their development projects. It was sloppy, arrogant, and it had cost Marcus millions. This was the final straw. The threat of exposing the cover-up of Kevin Miller's death wasn't just a moral reckoning for Marcus. It was the ultimate leverage, the weapon he would use to ruin Elias utterly before turning him over to the authorities. The warrant came through late in the afternoon. Carter and 2 uniformed officers proceeded to the guest house where Elias was staying. They were professional, quiet, and efficient. Elias protested, of course, feigning outrage at the harassment, but the warrant was ironclad. O'Connell watched from a distance as they went through his belongings. In a high-end leather garment bag, tucked between 2 bespoke suits, was a dark navy rain jacket from a premium outdoor brand. It looked clean, pristine. But as Carter carefully turned it over, he found what O'Connell was hoping for. On the right cuff, near the Velcro strap, was a tiny, almost invisible fray in the fabric. A single thread was loose, and a minute triangular tear marred the otherwise perfect surface. It was the size of a fingernail. The jacket was sent immediately to the state crime lab for expedited analysis. The preliminary report came back that evening. The dark blue polymer fibers from the jacket were a perfect microscopic match to the single fiber found under Marcus Thorne's fingernail. O'Connell now had him. Motive, to prevent financial ruin and a murder charge. Opportunity, the fabricated alibi. And now, the physical link, a fiber from his jacket clutched in the hand of the man he killed. But O'Connell wanted more than a conviction. He wanted a confession. He wanted to see the polished mask of Elias Vance shatter. He decided to stage the final confrontation in the place where it all began, Marcus Thorne's study. The bloodstain had been professionally cleaned from the rug, but its shadow remained. The room still felt cold, haunted. O'Connell had Carter bring Elias to the study. He didn't sit behind the desk that was Marcus's seat of power. Instead, he stood by the large window, the restless gray ocean serving as his backdrop. Elias walked in, his expression a carefully constructed blend of indignation and weariness. "Detective, this has gone far enough. My lawyers will be filing a formal complaint." "Kevin Miller," O'Connell said, his voice quiet, cutting through Elias's bluster. "Does his sister know you were there that night, Elias? Does she know you watched her brother go under and did nothing?" Elias froze. The name hung in the air between them, a ghost from a quarter century ago. For the first time, a genuine crack appeared in his composure. "That was a tragic accident. Was it an accident when Marcus found out you'd been stealing from him for years?" O'Connell continued, taking a step forward. "Or when he told you he was going to confess his role in the cover-up, and that he had hired a PI to make sure your role was fully exposed? He wasn't just firing you, Elias. He was burying you." Elias's face was pale, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Marcus was a hypocrite. He was just as culpable as I was for what happened that night. He wanted to play the repentant sinner to save his own legacy, and he was willing to sacrifice me to do it." "So you came back here after the argument," O'Connell said, his voice a narrative, painting the scene. "The storm was raging. Perfect cover. You confronted him again. You begged, you reasoned, and then you threatened. But Marcus never backed down. He enjoyed seeing you squirm. And in that moment, all that rage from the business deal, from the embezzlement, from the threat of a murder chargite all boiled over." O'Connell walked towards the desk. "You struggled. He was stronger than you expected. He fought back. He scratched you, tore at the cuff of your jacket." O'Connell paused, letting the words sink in. "And in the chaos, your ring came off, your Corvus Society ring, the symbol of the secret that started all of this." "This is a fantasy," Elias snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. O'Connell laid the preliminary lab report on the desk. "The fibers found under Marcus's fingernails are a perfect match to the fibers of the jacket you were wearing that night. A jacket you were so careful to clean, but you missed the tiny tear on the cuff. You are linked to the victim, at the time of his death, by physical evidence." He then placed a second evidence bag on the desk. Inside was the signet ring. "And this is the exclamation point on your story. It fell off your hand as you were bludgeoning him with his own decanter. You didn't realize it was gone until it was too late. You killed him, finished the job with that letter opener, and then you searched for it in the dark, but you couldn't find it. You had to leave it behind. A golden little piece of your past, left at the scene of your future." Elias stared at the ring, his mask completely gone now, replaced by a look of raw, primal fury. He looked from the ring to O'Connell, his chest heaving. He was cornered. A lifetime of lies and ambition had led him to this cold, silent room, and it was all over. In a sudden, explosive movement, he lunged not at O'Connell, but at the heavy, ornate lamp on the corner of the desk. He ripped it from its socket and swung it wildly, smashing it against the panoramic window. The security glass spiderwebbed but didn't break. It was a desperate, animalistic act of defiance. Carter and another officer, who had been waiting just outside the door, burst in. Elias didn't fight them. The energy seemed to drain out of him all at once. He slumped, a defeated man, and allowed them to handcuff him. As they led him away, he stopped and looked back at O'Connell. His eyes filled with a chilling, empty hatred. He deserved it, Elias whispered. He created me and then he tried to destroy me. It was self-preservation. You tell that to Kevin Miller's sister, O'Connell replied, his voice devoid of sympathy. In the aftermath, the remaining pieces fell into place. Isabella Thorne, faced with a prenuptial agreement that Marcus had indeed been about to enforce, quietly left the Eyrie with a fraction of what she had expected, her future uncertain. Julian Thorne inherited control of the empire his father had built, a weight of responsibility that seemed to sober him instantly. He announced his intention to sell off the majority of the real estate holdings and use the capital to fund his sustainable tech ventures, a final, quiet act of rebellion against his father's memory. Ava Monroe, having fulfilled her last duty to her employer, resigned, taking her $250,000 payment and disappearing as silently as she had arrived. O'Connell stood on the cliffside one last time, looking at the imposing structure of the Eyrie. The storm had revealed the rot within its walls, and a small gold ring had given voice to a ghost. It was a reminder that no matter how high a person builds their walls, or how deep they bury their secrets, the past has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. And sometimes, it demands justice, leaving a trail of blood and gold in its wake.